welcome to the IMA Clinical Research webinar. We've invited Mario Rocci to moderate this session. So I'll just give you the most brief introduction. He is a strategic advisor on our executive team here at IMA Clinical Research. And he has so much great knowledge that we wanted him to be a part of this to help just facilitate, moderate the discussion. So with that, I will mute myself, take off my camera, and I will let Mario take over from here.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Eva, and good afternoon, everyone. As Eva said, my name is Mario Rocci, and I'm a strategic advisor to IMA Clinical Research. It's my pleasure to moderate the webinar this afternoon entitled Shifting the Paradigm, A New Era of Alzheimer's Clinical Trials with Dr. Dani Cabral and Dr. Shayne Ladak. Can we have the next slide? We've set a couple of objectives for the seminar. The first objective is to understand the historical challenges in Alzheimer's research and how they've shaped our current approaches. And second, to learn the important role sites play in improving outcomes and the value they bring to Alzheimer's clinical trials. The format of this webinar is going to be a bit different than a traditional format, in that we're going to have more of a conversational tone to the webinar, where Drs. Cabral and Ladak might ask each other questions and weigh in on key topics related to the Alzheimer's clinical trial research area. But before getting to the webinar proper, I'd like Drs. Cabral and Ladak to give you a brief bio on their backgrounds. Dr. Cabral?
Hi, thank you, Mario. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I have been in the dementia world in some form or fashion for almost 20 years now, and for the last 7 years have been an Alzheimer's specialist physician, neurologist and psychiatrist, and clinical researcher leading several Alzheimer's treatment trials with industry and some other smaller grants to promote quality dementia care. So thanks for joining today, Dr. Ladak.
Thanks, Dani. My name is Shayne Ladak. I am a principal investigator at IMA Clinical Research in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I actually started my career as a neuroscientist. I did an undergraduate neuroscience degree at the University of Toronto, where I worked on age-related changes in the visual cortex, looking at memory in rats. It was exciting research at the time. Went on to medical school, and then I did residencies in radiology and in physical medicine and rehabilitation. My radiology focus was on neuroradiology, and physical medicine and rehabilitation was actually on neurological rehabilitation. So my interest has actually been from initially diagnosing Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia to imaging, and then to look at what we can do to help this patient population and their families cope with the devastation of the disease. Dani, I thought I'd get us started just talking a little bit about Alzheimer's disease and how pervasive it has become with our aging population. Unlike cancer, we have no way of treating the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease once they begin. We try and manage the dementia, the agitation and the memory lapses and the language disabilities. But aside from that, patients and families are really burdened by this illness. As you know, there are 6 million Americans that are affected by Alzheimer's disease, 1 million in comparison to Parkinson's disease. And just to talk about the history of Alzheimer's disease, it was initially diagnosed by a German psychiatrist in 1906 by the name of Alois Alzheimer, who the disease is named after. And patient zero was a woman named Auguste Dieter, who was a early 50s woman who presented with severe aggression, memory impairment, language disorder, and she passed away from this. And Dr. Alzheimer did an autopsy on her brain and found very unusual spider-like tangles of her neurons and a white dentate kind of substance, which he had never seen before. Unfortunately, Dr. Alzheimer passed away about 9 years later from the common cold. And nothing really ever came of his research until about 1968, when a group of 3 British researchers actually looked at the brains of 70 patients with similar types of senile dementia symptoms and found the same findings as Dr. Alzheimer had. And so they named the disorder Alzheimer's disease. And so that's where it has all began. Right now in clinical research, as you know, as an expert in Alzheimer's disease yourself, Dani, it is a very exciting time for clinical trials, for pharmaceutical companies, for patients, just to see what sort of scope we have and what sort of, we're doing in the advancement of the disease. Dani, as I said, you are a very accomplished Alzheimer's disease clinician and researcher. From your perspective, what are the unique aspects of the Alzheimer's population that make clinical trials complicated?
Thank you, Dr. Ladak, for that historical overview, which I'm sure some people were not aware of some of those aspects of the discovery of this disease or these diseases. So as a clinician, and I think, you didn't mention, I don't think, your background in palliative care, which is very relevant, or did you? I missed it.
No, I didn't miss that.
So I think my training and experience, real world experience as a clinician, and having a deeper sense of what individuals and their family members go through in our current healthcare system with these diseases sheds light or helps us see a different way in terms of when we're in the clinical trial setting of what's happening. And so Alzheimer's and related are very different from other diseases, other clinical trials. Some things, everything seems to be slower. The disease moves slower. Our ability to measure that, what we need to measure, is challenging. And that's a huge topic right now about how to define clinical meaningfulness of these treatments. Of course, so costly, the screening procedures, high screen fail rate. It's difficult to clinically characterize these participants coming through, especially if they haven't been able to go to a tertiary or subspecialty memory center, which most people can't, or they're afraid to. So we're their first, stopping point to try to figure out what's going on. And that's a lot of responsibility, actually, maybe than some other disease clinical trials like hypertension or diabetes. And even moving slower when they come into the visits. They walk slower, some, mobility issues. There's 2 people, there's not just one participant. So there's so many factors that make these trials so much more complicated, and that this disease is so heterogeneous in how it's presenting. And even, we use MMSE so commonly, and that's a common reason why individuals screen fail. And if you have a bad night's sleep, the night before you come in, you might easily miss that cutoff for that MMSE score, which is so frustrating if the person would be an excellent candidate otherwise. And I think we can all relate to trouble thinking when we don't sleep well. So those are some of the, I think, main issues.
Yeah, that's actually very true. Dani, what sort of site level factors can contribute to better navigate these types of challenges? What can we do at the site level?
So similar to what I was saying about the Alzheimer's presents such a different set of issues than a lot of other disease clinical trials. How can we? So let me step back and say there's so many gaps in care in the needs of people, and there's an overestimation that our current treatments and even those under investigation are going to solve all their problems because they're so desperate. They don't know what's going on. They need so much help, resources. They really want to be connected to a reliable, healthcare setting, social setting. So how can we as sites and as PIs and staff members and team members and coordinators try to support all these needs and not, cause the placebo effect, which I'm sure that does happen commonly when participants come in for their dementia-related diseases because they don't have any, other support. And the staff, I know at Phoenix and I know Albuquerque are excellent and supportive. So how can we create this environment that leads to subjects feeling like they can be connected and be in an investigational study, but understand that it's not, that we don't know if it's going to help, and know that this isn't your medical care, and then how to potentially, direct people to get the care they need or connect with the Alzheimer's Association. So, can we as sites work with sponsors and with Alzheimer's Association and other organizations locally, caregiver coalitions and things to try to get people a little more of a comprehensive set of, support and services beyond the specific clinical trial. And I just think that's essential. And if we could have a more coordinated system for that collaboratively, that would be really have major impact. So.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think, for example, in Albuquerque, we do a lot of outreach with the community. We work with community stakeholders and groups just to make sure that we are covering all our bases and providing the best care possible to our subjects and their care providers. A lot of our patients are impaired to the point that they cannot provide their own care. And so, we're depending on caregivers to provide that added support. And that's what makes our clinical trials more successful.
So would it be fair to say that the role of the principal investigator and the other health professionals at a particular site can help build value in the clinical trial in the eyes of the, possibly in the eyes of the person with the disease, but certainly the care takers? And also, can that pay off in terms of better retention of the subjects in the clinical trial, as many of these trials go on for some time?
Yeah, I think there's so much truth to what you've just said. Retention of these subjects is key, and providing that support and education to the caregivers or even the subjects is very important. There's a lot of stigma attached to Alzheimer's disease, and so people are scared. They don't necessarily want to find out that they might have cognitive impairment. They're scared of what that would mean for them, and so providing that added support, that education, addressing potential adverse events and what we can do to support them with that, coordinating with their primary care providers and neurologists in the community. All of that is key to our approach and success with making a successful study.
I would agree and add that there's so much fear for individuals that are going through the memory loss and their family members, that to feel like they can have a credible, trusted PI, physician or clinician and team that they can go to, and that to open their minds to clinical research and to truly understand, to feel that they're not just giving, but that they're getting something also, because that's, you often hear people say, well, I don't want to be a guinea pig. But truly, I believe in, of course, where we're headed in this field from a clinical research perspective. And then because I'm also able to give people advice and education about this disease, and try to have their best interests at heart, and be fair about, hey, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, we don't have a cure yet, this is what we think this is going to do, and speak in a way that people can hopefully comprehend, and that I think helps create a more expansive understanding that, like, yeah, you're not going to blueberry your way out of this. You're not going to maybe exercise your way out of it, even if, you do everything right. But if you do get to the point that this is starting, like, this is one of the, 10 things that you can do. And if you're not ready to do it now, you can come back in a year. So, Dr. Ladak, I have a question for you. So there's, like you said, there's so much happening in this field. It's so exciting. And we hear a lot about amyloid, of course, farthest along, and then tau-based treatments also. But where is drug development heading in Alzheimer's research?
So that's a really good question. We're looking at earlier and earlier detection of the disease and trying to formulate interventions early in the patient population to stop the progression of the disease. When Alzheimer's disease is actually diagnosed in the clinical setting, it's usually too late. The disease process has started many years earlier. So, as you mentioned, there's the tau protein and the amyloid beta, which was discovered in the 1980s. But in addition to that, we have genetic markers that we're looking at. So we're looking at apolipoprotein E and the E4 allele, which actually increases your risk of Alzheimer's disease by about 3 to 4 times. And if you've got 2 copies of that allele, by 12 times. So there's a lot of genetic markers that we can tap in on and try and intervene early with people, particularly when they're younger. And then there's other types of markers, such as there is something called the KLVS variant of the Klotho gene, which actually helps prevent Alzheimer's disease. And there have been mice studies which have actually improved cognition in about 30% of the mice that they tested. And so that's significant. We're also looking at inflammatory markers. So, certain types of cytokines and interleukin-6 that cause neuroinflammation and oxidative stress. So there's all this very exciting work that's being done in Alzheimer's research. The key is that we intervene earlier and earlier. And then I know you're an expert in the lifestyle intervention surrounding Alzheimer's disease and how, type 2 diabetes doubles or even triples your risk of having Alzheimer's disease. So, trying to look at other comorbidities and how we can intervene and prevent the burden of illness.
Great. Yep. So much happening. And I would add, just biologically characterizing the disease as essential to enter into a, clinical trial of Alzheimer's disease has been a massive advance to get the right subjects into the right treatment trials. And then also considering co-occurring pathologies, there's more and more excitement about an interest in the Alzheimer's Lewy body variant, so to speak. And it seems that moves faster, progresses faster, sort of more malignant. So then ultimately, hopefully being able to characterize all of that and have trials that, are understanding how that progresses in a different way. So
Absolutely.
What about, what do you think, Dr. Ladak, that pharmaceutical companies look for in a clinical trials site or company for doing high quality Alzheimer's drug trial research?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think one of the key things is looking at expertise at the site, either in neurology like yourself or in neurological rehabilitation, and looking at that expertise in the framework of Alzheimer's disease. With these patients, what we want to really, or with these subjects, what we want to really test is attention, processing speed, verbal fluency and memory, their logical memory. All of these things can be tapped in on by expertise at the site level, and that's what we should be doing so that we know that we're getting the right subjects in for the clinical trials. The other things are expertise in regulatory compliance, in high quality data management, making sure that we have reliable data collection, looking at patient recruitment and retention strategies, as Mario alluded to earlier, using robust ethical standards, obtaining informed consent in an appropriate manner. These patients are compromised, making sure that they have the support and the caregivers and advanced directives. And then multi-site coordination is really key. And for clinical research companies like IMA, where we have a national presence, that's really good because we can coordinate with other PIs and sub-Is in our other sites just to see how, if they're facing any challenges, if there's anything that we can do to collaborate. And so that makes us a stronger network.
So Dr. Cabral, earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that given the variations in which the disease presents, that you could very well exclude a person you would consider to be qualifying based on any inclusion or exclusion criteria that the protocol might provide. So maybe just backing up the clinical trial process a bit. How much influence do you think, or how beneficial is it to have experienced principal investigators basically providing input to the protocol devising teams at pharma to make sure that we stand our best chance of including as many patients that are eligible in the clinical trial, while at the same time ensuring that whoever you've enrolled, there's a good chance of creating data sets that are valid and appropriate for interpretation relative to the drug's either efficacy or side effects.
Yes, I think, it's so challenging in this area of how to find that balance. And over the years, I've definitely been pretty frustrated when there's this, it's like it's sort of the unicorn that a study wants to find, this person who's extremely amnestic, but is going to score, they're high functioning, but yet nothing sticks in there at all, so it's like, that's not real life. But eventually, as I got more seasoned, I stopped like being so frustrated and tried to think about what you're saying, like, how can we work together? Yet we want to uphold the scientific method, yet the scientific method also encompasses community, feedback and input and the culture, and that plays a huge role in our current society and with this disease, and how there's sort of collective, I think, denial of us all. Like, none of us can really imagine, but like half of the people on this call are going to develop dementia, right? If we don't, keep moving forward with these treatments. But I know it's hard for me. So how, getting back to your question, how can there be space for the PI knowing the subject coming in that, they're healthy, they're checking all the boxes, and they just missed something by a point, and even if they do the MMSE again, they miss by a point? Like, is there any flexibility there? I think, and listening to the PIs and feeling what they have to say is valid. It's helpful to have these ongoing relationships over time between industry and kind of more clinician PIs, and seeing that, I know Dr. Ladak and I and Dr. Collins in Albuquerque have legitimate interest in, care and concern for this population. And so, and there's also, I would say, in science in general, and maybe, I don't know if in more neuroscience than other fields, because I've only really been in this field, but there seems to be, I think, a fear of, if you have a concern or see things, to expressing that to the other entity because of fear of your reputation or things like that. And I've certainly suffered consequences from speaking my mind. And as I've matured, I've learned how to do that better and to be more effective with that. But at the same time, can we all try to tease out, like, well, what is this person trying to say in their concern, and how can we potentially operationalize that? Because then we have treatments now being approved, and then there's this outcry like, this isn't actually meaningful, and so I have opinions about why that is also, but maybe that's for a future question.
I think the other point that Dr. Ladak made is, based on your understanding and the furtherance of your knowledge relative to the disease state. And let's take, for instance, in the biomarker area, okay, there's some long established biomarkers that you alluded to earlier, and then there's some newer ones that are coming on the scene and could hold promise, and maybe they don't. Okay, we just don't know. So again, is there an opportunity at an early stage of protocol development or prior to protocol finalization to say, hey, for an experienced PI, a knowledgeable PI, to say, hey, based on my experience, I think it might be of value, okay, to measure this particular, let's take some samples to measure this particular biomarker, because we think that could be illustrative of, of a beneficial drug effect.
I think it's paramount to do that. Absolutely. Yeah, you're spot on. So Dani, building on what you just said and what Mario just asked you, can you give an example of an advance in Alzheimer's clinical trials where there was a collaboration between a site and PI and the sponsor?
I think I saw this really clearly when I was in my fellowship, my neurodegenerative disease research fellowship at Brown University with Dr. Steve Salloway, who's been really big in the Alzheimer's clinical care and research field. And so when I was in fellowship and before, he's one of the PIs that was identifying the first instances of ARIA, amyloid-related imaging abnormality, and listening to the participants and the study partners. And, of course, some people ended up dying in some of the trials because of when this was, before we knew much, but it was so essential to have PIs who had good relationships with the participants and understood the neuroscience enough to then work with the sponsors to ultimately, get a better sense of this, have a safer monitoring and treatment approach, management. And this is a huge area that we're still learning about. But it was very, for me at that impressionable stage to see how he was able to have a big impact on that. And I mean, he's, his opinion is sought after more and more over time in this field, of course, but that's a great example.
Yeah, that is a great example.
So maybe I could ask you a question, Dr. Ladak. So you talked a little bit about this, but why is Alzheimer's disease so difficult to diagnose?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and at the site level, it's a very pertinent question. You referred to the MMSE. We use other cognitive testing evaluations, such as the SLUMS or the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. But I think the key things to remember is that Alzheimer's disease symptoms overlap with normal aging. I mean, many symptoms of early Alzheimer's disease, such as forgetfulness and other cognitive declines, happen as part of normal aging. There's also symptom variability. People have multiple different comorbidities, such as depression, where there is a condition called pseudodementia, which is really depression manifesting as a type of a cognitive impairment. So you need to have a clear picture of honing in on, is this truly Alzheimer's disease or is it not? Alzheimer's disease also progresses slowly. It starts early. We know that it starts earlier and earlier, and the progress is slow. So symptoms may be easily overlooked, or they may mimic other conditions. Then, with early onset Alzheimer's disease, it's often misdiagnosed because people chalk it up to, is this stress? Is this depression? Is this something else going on? So, I mean, that's what makes it really challenging. And that's why you really need to have PIs and sub-Is at the site level that really focus in on what we're looking for to make our subjects better and that our clinical trials successful.
Absolutely.
Dani, with certain drugs, we see many barriers in prescribing. For example, the first FDA-approved Alzheimer's disease modifying treatments. There's been a lot of challenges. Is it possible for all the stakeholders in the clinical trials ecosystem to more readily anticipate and develop solutions in advance of FDA approval? Like, how do we navigate that space?
That's the question, isn't it? So, of course, I think to step back, I think about, why, if it costs $1 billion or more to bring a drug to market, obviously you want to be able to bring, get some of that back and actually help patients and families and get this into people who it could benefit. And, it's exciting to be a part of this, but also disappointing, disheartening, say, for example, that Leqembi, which has been approved, has not been picked up as fast as we expected at all. And so clearly we have, I think, well-intentioned clinicians that just don't have any experience or have very little experience unless they were involved in the trials, which very few were, and to feel confident that they can manage the potential side effects, they understand what's happening, and is this something that, say, hindsight, of course, but could this have been anticipated for, where all the stakeholders, including CMS, could get together and really say, okay, how are we going to help clinicians potential prescribers feel confident that they know who to prescribe to? They have the the backups, the supports to safely prescribe this, there's an incentive. And, we also have this whole, there's certainly an opinion by certain clinicians and public that, this isn't even really a big difference than what we already have, which I absolutely, have a different opinion. But then I would step back and say, so imagine a world that a person goes to their primary care and says they have memory loss and they get an MCI due to AD diagnosis, and they immediately get clicked into like resources, support, counseling, personalized for them. Then they feel good, they feel supported, and then they can then pursue these treatments or pursue clinical trials and not expect that clinical trial or that treatment to like serve all these purposes. And when we, there's more talk about or looking at like, well, what is clinically meaningful? Like, what does that really mean? And when there's these surveys done of patients and their family members, some of the things are people want to have access to resources and things like that. And obviously a drug is not going to provide access to resources. And so I really, it's kind of, I think we're moving in this direction just a little too slowly, but could we all get together and spend that time and invest that, effort to really think about what's happening in the real world and how to get these drugs to the people that could benefit them? So I don't know what that would actually look like, but that has to happen. Yeah.
And I think at the site level, we have a lot of movement that we could do in that space. Where we can advocate for the patient, put them in touch with the resources in the community, because I don't see that happening by the providers themselves. I find we are often the ones that are linking the patients up with the support groups in the community and with the resources that are available to them. So I think we have an important role to play there.
Yeah, and I would just add, so I'm starting to view this as the scientific community overestimates where we're at with our understanding of these diseases and the treatments, and the clinicians underestimate what we have here. So this play, where we're going and what we even have already can play a really important role for patients and families. But we're not all speaking the same language at this point. So yeah, how can sites play an important role in that? And I think, I want to be a part of that.
For sure.
So
absolutely.
To you, Dr. Ladak. So what makes an Alzheimer's clinical drug trial successful, would you say?
So I think there's many different things that we need to put into place. Obviously clear objectives and hypotheses, a robust study design that would minimize bias and really accommodate the complexities of Alzheimer's disease and its progression. But also appropriate participant selection, which is what you alluded to a short while ago. Effective recruitment and retention strategies are key. And then use of validated biomarkers, which I think has been a bit of a challenge. There are biomarkers out there, but are they really what we are looking for? Are they effective? Are they helpful in diagnosis and in developing drug treatment? And then there's ethical considerations, ensuring that we're holding high ethical standards in recruiting our patients and making sure that they are consented appropriately. Obviously, we're all adept at GCP, and sometimes we take it a little bit for granted, but we all stress at IMA how important that is, and making sure that when people are consented, that they are given the appropriate information as to why they're coming into the study and what we can offer them as a clinical trial site. And then there's, successful trials are really dependent on interdisciplinary collaboration. So, collaborating with psychometrists and psychologists and neurologists and psychiatrists and primary care providers. And then the last thing I would say is sort of effective data collection and management, being very astute with how we're collecting our data and making sure that our data is absolutely pristine and that, we hold ourselves to the high standard that is expected to make progress in Alzheimer's disease research.
That was great answer. Thank you. And on the biomarker front, I'm I'm really encouraged that more of the studies of treatments for neuropsychiatric symptoms in Alzheimer's are requiring Alzheimer's biomarker confirmation in order to be eligible for those. So I think that's really important advance to legitimize these treatments and find the right people that they're going to help. And then, I would just add, I hope that we move towards the sort of philosophy of the cancer treatment model where clinical research is a core pillar of care, high quality care, so I say there's in Alzheimer's, early diagnosis, treatment, caregiver support, and clinical research. And so to have a trusted site like IMA, in different areas around the country and have that network of those doing the Alzheimer's trials can be so beneficial for so many reasons, like you're saying.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the oncology model is to some extent a gold standard, and I think adopting that for Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative diseases in general is key. Dr. Cabral, can you speak to DEI in clinical trials, which really continues to be a major challenge? And can you suggest any novel or innovative approaches to Alzheimer's disease clinical trials in that space?
So this is a vexing question for all of clinical research, especially Alzheimer's seems to actually have maybe one of the lowest percentages of underrepresented individuals coming in, and that's definitely improving. But you hear a lot about trust. So like, what does that mean? It's not a binary thing. There's not just they trust you or they don't. Like, there's a lot to that, and that can actually someone can trust you and then you can do something and they don't. So to me it's about, even in your like life relationships, it's about creating that foundation of rapport and getting to know each other over time, and having that so that a person or community is willing to talk to you, hear you, and really it's about starting with curiosity and questions and open-mindedness, and that requires not just sitting in a room with your colleagues talking about DEI problems, right, but like going to the people that you want to connect with and listening first. And so that takes time and money to send staff to do that. And I would really love to see more like pop-up trial sites in the neighborhoods that with staff members that look like the people in that neighborhood and speak the same language. And it's really, it just really takes time to develop those relationships. And so I think in general, a lot of the things we do are like these one-off events, and they may have a little blip that benefits us, but to be able to develop these relationships over time and know that if you start this relationship, it could take 2 years, but then it could really pay off in many ways. And so with Alzheimer's, of course, I think it's about just being willing to give more than you get in some ways, at least to start. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Dr. Ladak?
I completely agree with you. I think there is a lot of marginalization with neurodegenerative disease and in terms of the communities that we are able to serve. And I know from the Albuquerque example, we have a site that has Spanish-speaking individuals, and we get a lot of interest from different community groups and community stakeholders, and we try and support all of those stakeholders in making sure that they are apprised of the work that we're doing, and also that they are able to participate in some of the work that we're doing. And so that's been really key. Our site administrator is particularly adept at building those relationships, and so we've been able to do that, and it's really worked well for us.
And I think Maria, she helped connect us with our Alzheimer's Association partners here. So it's really nice to have, like you said, like different multi-site network to draw on from experience and relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Dani, I know you have particular interest in lifestyle factors in aiding to stave off Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases. What would you suggest we offer subjects and their families in addition to participation in our studies from that perspective?
when people come into trials, and I wonder if you see this too, and even now that there's, an FDA approved treatment, disease modifying treatment, sometimes it's a window, maybe a window of an opportunity where people become hopeful and motivated. And you may hear like, oh, they've been into pickleball, or they have these like hobbies where that they used to go ballroom dancing, this couple, and maybe they haven't been. So it's an opportunity to like sneakily recommend a lifestyle intervention of, and I often have stopped calling it exercise, and I just say move your body. We know that, there's this amazing number, the statistic that apparently 40% of dementia could be prevented with like 12 different lifestyle factors, more like, earlier in life, like midlife or before. But even when people are starting to become symptomatic, having these introducing or restarting different exercise is so beneficial for so many reasons, and mood and sleep. So I try to do some, counseling on that whenever possible, and whenever I'm giving talks, I put in a plug for especially exercise and things like that. So and I always say with like midlife, when people maybe don't think they need to yet be doing anything, well, actually they do. So otherwise, it's really I just always say like we can't reduce this disease to like be cured by one thing. It's so complex, and eventually like the real effective treatments, I bet, are going to be very multifactorial combination. And wouldn't it be nice if like we were incentivized, maybe got more funding or reimbursement for people to, go exercise and things like that. So maybe with Alzheimer's and related, like that will become a thing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, as a physical medicine rehab doc, I'm a huge proponent of that in terms of exercise, in terms of dancing. I mean, dancing in and of itself helps to stave off Parkinson's disease. The research is pretty compelling on that. And in terms of exercise, just in and of itself, I mean, there is no pharmaceutical product on the market right now that prevents dementia as well as exercise does. So I think we can help to target, aim for something that would be that good. But I think we should provide that level of education and encouragement to just move, and I think that would be very beneficial. Absolutely.
And the improving social isolation, with going dancing, like being part of a community. These are things that were very lost during COVID, especially. So, and as we get older, so those are all benefits that are harder to measure, but maybe someday we'll have those
Absolutely.
biomarkers.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Great.
So earlier in the webinar, Dr. Cabral, you brought up the issue of, clinical researchers in this area might tend to be more optimistic than a practitioner in the area as to the impact of pharmaceutical interventions or other things in managing patients with the disease. Given that some of the patients anyway might have primary care physicians or specialists that are helping them along, is there a role by virtue of that connection that we can play to help kind of narrow this gap in understanding or perception of the beneficial effects of various therapies on the disease? You brought up the oncology model, and that seems to be going quite well. And as you said that, I was wondering whether there's a play out of the oncology playbook that we could take to help, again, bring the perceptions closer together.
Well, my answers are probably surprising, but I would say no. There's like, I don't know that we can learn from oncology on this because, our society hates aging. So it's, you can imagine yourself being like in the current, in the present, like having a cancer and having pain and dealing with the existential issues. But, they've done studies like we can't actually imagine ourselves like old, as 85 if we're like, in our 20s and 30s and 40s or maybe 50s and 60s. So how do we, I think about the big Alzheimer's conferences and how not sexy it is to talk about dementia care. And that's really like, that's what it is. That's the people. These are the humans. it's fun to talk about, all the, scientific things and biomarkers. And so I think that ultimately, until our society sees any value in getting older, and I would just say I've increasingly realized that I have benefited as a clinician by actually just being in the room with some of my patients who are old, wise people, that they just transmit something where I feel better after the visit. And I think young people, and even meaning like in their 50s even, could to be open about that, and not just like it's sad and everything gets, crusty as you get older. Like I hear 20 something saying this, right? So there are benefits, but this is a huge topic. And I think that there's a ways to go there, but because of all the significant mental health issues in young people, like maybe there is a window there that people will start to see like their need that could actually bringing together these researchers with the clinicians and the actual patients and families could be beneficial for everyone.
I do sometimes see this with family members who come in with their loved ones who are, either patients or subjects in a clinical trial, where the child is then concerned about their risks and what they can do differently and stuff like that. So it's an opportunity to provide that level of education. But I think you're right. Unless you're connected to Alzheimer's disease or dementia or neurodegenerative disease in some way, you don't really think about it as much. And I think there is an opportunity there to provide more information and education on longevity and aging in a better way. And we're starting to see a little bit of that in the research space, but it's really more being done by functional medicine specialists and not so much in sort of conventional medicine. And I think clinical trials are a good opportunity for us to provide that.
Okay. Well, we're beginning to get to the top of the hour here, and I'm just wondering if anyone has any final questions or comments before we wrap the webinar up.
I think Alzheimer's disease research is very exciting. I think we're in a very exciting time. I think there has been a lot that has happened, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years. And I anticipate a lot more in the next 10 to 15 years. And I'm excited that Dr. Cabral and I will be part of that. And we will move, the goalpost to make sure that as PIs and as part of this organization, that we make a difference and help patients and help their families to benefit from our work.
Dr. Cabral, any parting comments here?
Yeah, just similar to something that was said before, the clinical trial site might be the least intimidating way that a person or their family members can start to ask questions and understand what's going on for themselves, as opposed to going to their doctor. Even though we're doctors, they view us differently, and they'll open up and share things and in ways that are a little different. And that can that's, I think, where we could have a big surprising impact on this disease area and field and the care that is eventually created.
Great, thank you. Well, listen, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank both of you for a very informative webinar. I'd also like to thank all of those that have participated in this IMA clinical research webinar. If you have any comments or questions about the webinar, please email us at businessdevelopment@imaresearch.com. These can be questions for either Dr. Cabral or Dr. Ladak. We're very interested in hearing your comments and certainly answering any questions that you might have. In addition, if you happen to be going to the Alzheimer's Association International Conference and would like to meet with Dr. Cabral, she will be there. And so again, please email us at the same email address to schedule a meeting or visit. So once again, thank you everyone for your participation in this IMA clinical research webinar. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Mario. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.